You're listening to Viewpoint, a podcast of Highlands Church. Well, welcome everyone. Viewpoint is a podcast discussing challenging cultural issues from the Bible's point of view, and we want to equip the church to be able to encounter the world around us with the truth of the gospel. I'm Brendan Anderson, the Weekend Services Pastor at Highlands Church in Scottsdale, and I am joined, as always, by our Pastor of Adult Education, Joe Infranco. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, and great to be with you as always, Brendan.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're actually talking about school. So, Joe, I got to ask you, what was school like for you? I'm not going to reveal your age or anything like that, but what was school like for you? Did you like it?
Yeah, well, back in World War I, I'm okay. So, I grew up in New York, and there were not the kind of Christian school, opportunities that you see now in much of the country. Homeschooling was virtually unknown. It was almost, I think probably a lot of people thought it was illegal. Where I grew up, it was pretty much public education or Catholic school. And there was a very large Catholic population. But it was a different time. I have recollections of prayer in public schools, if you can imagine that, before the Supreme Court found prayer illegal. There was a time when the New York State Board of Regents wrote the approved prayers that were recited in schools. And I'll tell you, it was not a religious environment. We thought of it as ceremonial, if even that. And, we were more concerned with misbehavior like running in halls and getting caught chewing gum. I know this sounds incredibly parochial and hard to believe there was a time like this, but it is so. And I had friends getting in trouble because their hair grew over their collars. So it was public education. It was probably in terms of behavioral codes, mores, similar to a lot of Christian education now. But that was my experience. How about yours?
Yeah, I grew up in just a medium-sized town in southern Minnesota, and so the idea of choosing a school was not even on our radar. We just went to school, like the school. I think there was probably a Catholic school in our town, but I didn't know anybody who went there. We never really heard about it. So we just went to the school, but being a quiet Midwestern town, it was pretty much in line with even the values that we would find at church. I didn't see a huge difference between the interactions I would have at church and the interactions I would even have at school. A lot of my teachers throughout my school career, elementary, junior high, they went to my church. And so I saw them in both places, but it was a public school environment. Schools in the Midwest like that are usually pretty strong. We have great arts programs. It was an awesome experience. And so for me and my family, just to get ahead a little bit, in Arizona, where we've got so many choices as far as school goes, that was really foreign to me because we really just kind of had the school and had a great, just kind of plain, just as you would think of it, school.
Yeah. I'll add one other thought, which I think is going to come up in our discussion today, and that is the public schools I attended never undermined anything my parents were trying to do. If anything, they were disciplinarians. And if we got in trouble, the teachers called us out and notified our parents, and every kid lived in dread of that. I mean, true story, my older brother was a talented wrestler and was a high school wrestling coach and was very capable. He got into wrestling because he got in trouble in the cafeteria, got into a food fight. And the wrestling coach was also the dean of discipline, was going to call my father. And my older brother, as tough as he was, broke down in tears and said, "Please, is there anything else I can do?" And the coach said, "Well, what weight are you?" Whatever he was, I need a wrestler in that. Okay, if you come out for the wrestling team and put that energy to use, I won't call your father. Okay, deal. And such was the birth of my brother's wrestling career. Is again, a very different time.
Well, we are talking about school, specifically about how to choose a school. What kind of school should Christians send their kids to? The United States in general provides a pretty wide range of choice when it comes to educating kids. And as I mentioned, our home state here of Arizona is one of the most school choice friendly places in the nation. We've got even all kinds of financial support for any number of choices that parents want to make here. So how does a parent decide which path to take? Is public school education, is it just becoming too progressive or agenda driven? Does private Christian school, does that create too much of a sheltered bubble around kids? Or can kids develop the necessary social skills they need for adulthood if they get their schooling at home? What's homeschooling like? I'm going to establish this, spoiler alert, from the very beginning. This is not a debate episode, and there is no right or wrong answer that we're going to share with anyone. This is really just a discussion. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of each choice from a biblical perspective, and we're just going to help parents think through the questions that they might want to ask themselves as they make this decision for their children. In talking to our women's minister here, she talks about the moms group that we have, and this is like the number one thing that the moms are talking about amongst the moms group. So I think this is a huge area of equipping. It's a huge area of angst and nervousness and worry and just kind of freak out for young parents. And so I think this is an important one to talk about.
Well, thanks, Brendan. With that background, let's get to the format now. And you're going to be one of the viewpoints today. We have a special guest with us. We have Kenna McGrath, who is going to be talking about her experiences with her kids in Christian school. We have Leanne Deering, also my daughter, who's going to talk about homeschooling. And Brendan, your kids are going to public school, so you're going to be sharing some of your experiences on that, what went into your thinking. I think we're going to have kind of a good exchange today. And again, the purpose today is not to decide which of these is better. I know many families, in fact, where one child is educated one way and another is educated a different way. I think often the decisions families make center around the unique character of their children, what might be best for them. Is someone a great athlete? Does someone have some unusual opportunity? Are you more concerned about one and how he or she might hold up in public education? Those are real factors, and we'll talk about what that looks like. So with that, let's meet our guests. Why don't we start with Kenna? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your family, your children, and so on.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. This is a great discussion. So I am married. I've been married for almost 29 years. My husband, Tyler, is a pastor at Highlands. So we've been in the ministry and Christian world quite a long time. I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. They are 21, almost 20, and then 14. So my 21-year-old is done with high school, obviously, went to a trade school. My middle one, Lauren, is in at GCU. And then my youngest is an 8th grader at a Christian school.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you guys. My name is Leanne Deering, and I am married to Matthew for 16 years. And we have 5 children, starting at age 12 all the way down to our new baby, who is actually right here with me at this moment. And we started homeschooling at the very beginning when my oldest was a kindergartner. So that has been our journey from start to finish.
And Brendan, we're going to include you in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have 2 kids, been married since 2005. I have 2 kids. They are ages currently 8 and 11, just wrapping up as of this recording, just wrapping up 2nd grade and 5th grade. And we have had them in public schools, a couple different public schools, which I'll talk about as we move along, but have had great experiences there. And just looking forward to the discussion. Now, I should say also, Joe, as a foundation, just as a church and thinking about equipping the church to follow Jesus in regards to the family, we would always say as a church that the primary source of discipleship, of training up kids to know and love Jesus, comes in the home. And we have great biblical foundation for that. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." That is an encouragement to parents. Also, we're going to mention probably several times Deuteronomy 6. There's an encouragement to the Israelites as they're entering into this new land that says, "You shall love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So there's a biblical foundation for the instruction of our kids in the ways of faith. But also, we know if we're trying to make these types of decisions biblically, there are certainly principles that we can go to, but turning to the Bible and say, oh, how did people in Bible times educate their kids? That's not necessarily a one-for-one correlation. So, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about what we see in the Bible as far as education goes?
Yeah, this is great background. Let's stay with the New Testament period. And I'm glad you said what you did about the obligation or the need for parents to train up children. And, you of course quoted from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And what I love about that is it's not so much a formal instruction as it is integrating into every part of life. You'll teach them diligently. You'll talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, you rise up. So it's kind of conversation that happens over dinner or that happens while you're working with your kids over something. It's how you react to things. Biblical times, this is interesting, and I think there's something we can draw from this that's really helpful. And that is today, when we enter a discussion like this, I think kind of the modern American mind tends to see things in categories, and we make the categories distinct. Oh, I am choosing option A, B, or C, and that's it. You're stuck in it. I think for the Jewish mind at the time of Christ, there were three sources of education, and they were much more interwoven. And it was understood that all were going to happen. And those were instruction in the family, formal religious instruction in the synagogue, and then specialized education. But all three of those were viewed as essential for the culture. So you started with the family, and it was in Jewish tradition. In Genesis 18, Abraham is told by God to instruct his children and his family. You mentioned Proverbs 22:6. It was very much the idea that children should receive moral instruction from a family in order to know how to function in society. You see that expressed in places like Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good, what the Lord requires of you, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. That was the kind of value system that the Jews saw as essential to functioning in a society. And those were given primarily through the structure of the family. The second was the synagogue. The synagogue comes into existence probably, scholars think, during the Babylonian captivity. The temple is destroyed. There's no more temple as a center of worship. And so the Jews need local centers to keep religious training going. So even when the temple is rebuilt and Herod builds this incredible grand structure, you still see synagogues everywhere. You see Jesus teaching in synagogues. And the idea with the synagogue was the formal religious instruction. Kids started that about the age of 5, and they went through usually 12. They learned to read and write Hebrew, so they were literate. That was considered important. And they picked up Greek while they were there as well, because you had Jewish writings that were translated into Greek, like what's called the Septuagint. I don't want to get wonky here. But they had to know Greek also to function in the culture and to do business and everything. And then they graduated at 12. At 13, they entered manhood. If the boys entered manhood, and you still see that today in the Jewish faith, and now it's extended to the women as well. At 13, they have their bar mitzvah or their bas mitzvah. It literally is a son of the law, or a son of the Torah, almost in a way. So that was your religious instruction. And then you also had specialized instruction, which depended much on your social status, your location, your culture. A lot of the young men in particular learned trades from their families. Joseph, the husband of Mary, was a carpenter. And so Jesus learned carpentry, and we see he's plying his father's trade. That kind of thing was common. That was instruction, preparation for life. Women were instructed more in the duties of women in the home. That was just how the culture was organized. But you also had specialized schools. The Greco-Roman world, the Greeks were no longer the political power, but they were very influential in shaping how the Romans thought. So the Romans were more about civil authority, but the Greeks had schools of philosophy, medicine, oratory, and all of that. And so if you wanted to be trained as a lawyer, there was formal training. As a doctor, if you had a bent for philosophy, you could go to Athens, and we read about Paul there, in Mars Hill. All those were formal schools if you showed that aptitude. And if you showed that aptitude as a young Jewish male, you had the equivalent of what would be our seminary today. You would go to a school And the best teachers attracted the best students. So when the Apostle Paul says he learned under Gamaliel, what he's saying is, it's kind of like he's saying, I got into Harvard Seminary or something like that. The potential was seen in him. So you had structures of education, but all of these blended together. And each one had a perceived role. If you were getting medical training and the people there in the training were dealing with medicine, they weren't trying to do your moral training and so on. And I think that helped the education to function. So Daniel, for example, Old Testament, of course, but he's trained in the wisdom of Babylon. He learns their culture, their philosophy, all those things, but he still has his Hebrew training. They were not inconsistent. So it'd be like having a strong Christian background going to a secular university. Where it gets tricky today is where public education gets out of the traditional 3 R's and perhaps gets into kind of moral training on areas that are more sensitive. But that's how it worked in biblical times. I think if we think about integrating those today the way they did in New Testament times, we might be better off.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, even in New Testament times, you can see those beginnings and really establishments of the fact that there are educational institutions that people are interacting with at that time. But then again, going back to Scripture, the principle, looking at families, children, parents, really driving families towards that idea that the spiritual education, the faith-based education is coming from the home and their faith community. And that's a great reason to be active part of a local church.
Yeah, and incidentally, if you were, a Jewish growing up in that time, the purpose of learning, the Hebrew alphabet and all of that was religious instruction. That was the essential reason behind, officially schooling kids when they were young. It was related. It was for the purpose of instilling moral virtue and learning the Torah and learning what it meant to be a good Jewish citizen.
Yeah, that's great historical background. But now we're going to jump and fast forward into the here and now. And as I mentioned, especially in a state like Arizona, we have so many choices in which to figure out how to get the actual educational instruction of our kids. And so we're just going to start to go around and talk about some of the implications, pros, cons, and how that all works.
Why don't we kick this off with Kenna? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family decision to school your kids the way that you did? What were the biblical principles that shaped your choice? Tell our listeners more about that.
Yeah, so our kids actually all started in public school. So our 2 oldest went to public school through 8th grade. And it was just kind of like what Brendan was talking about, where it's just the local school, it's in your neighborhood, it's where your kids go. And we really liked it. It was a good fit for them and for us at that time, just to meet families in our neighborhood. In a quick nutshell, kind of what changed that for us was the middle of my oldest daughter's 8th grade year, right around January, she just was not in a great place. And we just felt like we actually pulled her from that school. And it wasn't because of public school per se. It was more just issues that she was struggling with. And we actually just did that semester at more of an online. I dropped her off 3 days a week and she kind of did her school there and just kind of finished up 8th grade where she just could be home with us and kind of have a reset. But then looking ahead to public high school for her, we just felt like it will be too big and too overwhelming. And the chances for some of those same mistakes and choices that kind of caused some issues were very much still possibilities. And so we felt like with her decision, we didn't force it, but we just said, what would it look like for you to consider kind of a start over, a fresh start, which unfortunately with social media today, you don't get the fresh start that we all used to get. You can't necessarily totally shield your kids because a lot of people can still follow your children, but that's for another discussion. But she really felt like a restart at a smaller school, the chance to make some new friends. And it was close to our house. So that was, as bad as it sounds, I thought, for me, we can't do 30, 45-minute drives to school. It's not going to work for us. So God really worked out that it was close by. So we moved her. So then my next daughter, who's only a year behind, when it came time for her to decide, and again, back to kind of Brendan's earlier point, but a lot of my middle daughter's friends, it's not like you all just go to the next school. because there's so much choice, she had a pretty large friend group, and they pretty much every single person was going to a different high school for the various reasons that were helpful to them. So she kind of felt like she wasn't going to leave a friend group. So she started considering, hey, maybe this Christian school where my sister's going might be a good fit. And so we kind of talked that through, literally made a pros and cons list. I can still remember sitting on our front patio because she really was struggling. And once we got it out of our heads and onto paper, she looked at it and said, I want to go to the Christian school. Just there's so many more pros for me. So again, we helped her. We didn't force it, but she just felt like let me switch. So she moved over, and again, a year behind my other daughter. So now they were both kind of back to back entering high school at a Christian school. My son, he did not go to our neighborhood public school. He, again, because of choice, there was another public school close by that had a Spanish immersion program. And we felt like, wow, this would be a really great fit to be able to bring language into our son's life in such a unique way. So we enrolled him there. And he was doing fine. He made it through fourth grade. And that's when we hit COVID, the spring of his fourth grade year. And he'd had an IEP. He had some learning difficulties, which also we felt like, learning in English was actually more challenging for him than we thought it would be. And then adding the language for him as time went on, we realized maybe this isn't the best fit for him. And then with COVID and being online with his learning disabilities, we just felt like this is not going to be good. He cannot do school online. It's not going to work. And so at that point, we looked at the Christian school where my daughters were, and we were on two different school schedules, which wasn't the deal breaker, but it was a pain to never have spring breaks line up, no holiday, the days off didn't line up, all that stuff. So to just have them all at one, we had 1 year where they were all at one school. It was really glorious. But we moved him because that school actually was opening in person in fall of 2020. And for the reasons that benefited him, we just felt like we need to move him, or there's a chance he's going to have to repeat fifth grade or have some serious setbacks. So that piece really played into it for us as well.
Permit me to ask a question, and I apologize in advance if this gets into sensitivities, but I think this is important. It's very interesting to me that you had this give and take with the kids, and my wife and I went through something like this with one of our kids about the school and your child's preference and what you thought is best, and you kind of got on the same page with it, and I think that's wonderful. Was there ever a point where there was a tension where perhaps one of the kids said, I want this, and you and Tyler thought, we don't think that's good, and there might have been some disagreement, or was there ever any aspect of that? And even if there wasn't, do you have thoughts on how parents can negotiate that kind of tension if they don't see eye to eye with the kid on what's the best choice?
Right. And that's a great question, because clearly at 14, there's no child's brain that's developed enough to make some of these types of decisions. So I will definitely say it was not completely up to our children. At the end of the day, we were going to make the decision that we felt best. It was nice that they were on board, but had we had to drag our oldest kicking and screaming to the Christian school, we probably would have, because we can see beyond the current situation she was in and know that this ultimately will be better for her, we hope. I think it'll be better for us. And so I hate to say just force it, because that's a terrible way to put it. But at the end of the day, you do know your kids, and they definitely have blind spots, and it depends on the age. But at that age, thankfully, she felt in agreement with us. But had she not, we would have done it anyway. But we approached it like, hey, we would like your input and feedback. What are your thoughts? And it went well, but we would have done it anyway. But our kids are all different, as we know. So our middle child, had she chosen public high school, I think we would have said great, because she could handle it socially, academically. She had just different skill sets, and I was not worried about her going there. I felt like she could legitimately make that choice, because there weren't the same issues or red flags that we had with our oldest. And then our youngest, he wanted to go. He hates change. Change was very scary for him. And so I always thought, gosh, if we ever have to move him, how are we going to do this without it being severely traumatic for him? And thankfully, just the way it all worked out, because a lot of families kind of dispersed at the end of that year of COVID, that spring year, he was not the only one moving. And so that helped him. But we also would have moved him. And especially when you're I guess he was maybe 10. I'm certainly not going to let my 10-year-old decide his future education. So we would have done what we felt best for him. But again, it happened to be that he was open to it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And two things jump out there just to summarize. One is your decisions were individualized to your children, their particular temperament or need, and sensitive to issues like COVID. Who knows when things like that are going to happen, in the world. And I think probably a lot of parents intuitively approach this that way. Yeah, I'm going to look at my kids, see where they would function well and all of that. But I like also the point you made that you were the decision maker, but you did seek buy-in. You didn't, your kids didn't feel like you ran over them. You made them a part of the process to give them a sense of ownership. So that may not always be an easy balance, but I love that you did that as much as you could. Leanne, let's go to you. Let's talk about your homeschooling experience with my grandchildren. Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to mention that. Okay.
Well, so I am as elder a millennial as a millennial can be. So as a child of the 80s and the 90s, homeschooling was just not a thing, especially in Long Island. I don't think we knew anybody homeschooling growing up. And then when Matt and I started our family, I remember Jack was getting toward kindergarten age, and I had this strong instinct and impulse to homeschool him. And I knew absolutely nothing about it, and I knew not a single person doing it. And so I was very conflicted. I remember sitting through the charter school that you alluded to, Dad. We went and we heard their presentation, and it was so impressive, and there was Latin involved and all these beautiful offerings. And I remember just thinking, I can't give him this. I can't give him this at home, but I have this really strong desire. What do I do with this? And early on in the process, the Lord impressed upon me, if you will let me fix you in real time, if you will let me grow you in real time, and you are humble-hearted and you are willing to let your children see that, I will bless your efforts. And I feel like I have seen that year over year that God has made fruitful these little offerings that I've been able to give him as we've grown our family even, and now the complexity of schooling multiple ages. And I can get into the logistics of what that looks like and the tools that we employ to make that possible, so that we can do that with excellence. But that was my very humble beginning. Was I felt very, very inadequate. And the first half of our kindergarten year, I remember thinking, surely this is just going to be for kindergarten, maybe first grade if I'm wild. Like, I just don't, how can we do this in isolation? How can we, this doesn't feel like it's going to be a long-term fit. And then the Lord led us to, I was sitting in Chick-fil-A and I heard another woman say homeschooling, another table over. And I just started crawling over to meet her. She turned out to be the leader of my Tuesday co-op, a wonderful woman. And they had a music teacher who was leaving, and music and acting happens to be my background. My husband and I have an acting school and a theater together in North Phoenix. And so we had to offer exactly what they were missing. And that became one of our most staple weekly groups, is this amazing Tuesday co-op who's been a really rich source of community for us, one of two co-ops that we now belong to.
You talked about you were strongly drawn to homeschooling.
Yeah.
And this may not be an easy question to answer, but was any part of your decision consciously, or that you're aware of, some kind of fear of public schooling, that there might be forces working against you or something? Was there any aspect of that in your thinking?
No, I don't think I was afraid of public school. I will be honest and say that there was a part of me that felt that 8 hours a day away from Jack didn't feel natural or right for our family at that moment. I guess I could phrase it that way. But no, it wasn't a distrust of public school. My sister-in-law, who I adore and am very close with, is a public school teacher. I know there are many wonderful educators who are looking out for our kids, and I don't have a distrust in the system as a whole. Of course, there's things to pay attention to and trends. I want to be clear about that. But no, that wasn't a motive.
I'm just going to pause you here for a minute, because this is just kind of a setup question on how you made the decision, and I'm going to go to my co-host, Brendan.
Yeah, we were a family, just like, like I said, our Minister of Women talks about all the women in the moms group, talking about, hey, we've got this 3-year-old kid, our first 3-year-old, and we know kindergarten's coming up. You got to start making these decisions and moves and thinking about that. We started panicking, just like most families do, thinking, man, we have so many choices here in Arizona, and certainly being heavily involved here at Highlands Church, there's a large number of families that go to sort of one of the primary Christian schools here in the city. And so we thought, well, that could be a possibility, but man, there are some pretty large financial implications. And beyond that, both my wife and I had really great experiences in public school. Just the opportunities that there were afforded, and certainly a city the size of Phoenix, we knew that there would be opportunities in the public education system. We had certainly heard rumors of, oh, this school is bad, this district's good, this district's bad. My wife is in the special needs community, so she had been familiar with some school districts just based on working with kids and their IEPs and the special needs that they had. And so we had just this incredible hodgepodge of information, disinformation, and rumor. And so we thought, well, the best thing to do probably if we're going to lean towards public school, because we valued that in our backgrounds, was to just start visiting some. And so we visited a couple. We visited the one that we are districted for, that a bus would come and pick up our kids to take to. And we thought that was all right. But there was another school also near our home. And so we went to that public school, took a tour there, met some of the administrators and some of the teachers, and actually had a really great feeling about what that one was versus the other school that we had visited, and felt pretty confident in that school and just the family atmosphere that it had. Enjoyed talking with the principal and some of the other teachers. And so we decided to move forward with that. Another, Kenna mentioned the language immersion. Again, a city, a metro area the size of the Phoenix area, you have a lot of schools offering a lot of different things. This particular elementary school that we liked just in general also had a dual language immersion program, this time in Mandarin Chinese. They said, hey, do you want to enroll in that? We thought, well, maybe. I know we didn't seek the school out because of that, but my wife knows brain development for kids and knows that that's healthy for brain development. We thought, what's the worst that could happen? And so enrolled them in the dual language immersion program, my son Jack, as he started. And that's kind of how we went. But we also went into it knowing that it might be a year-by-year evaluation, that you might have a good year, things might not work out. And then the school choice system in Arizona, we may have to reevaluate as we go. Went into it knowing that we were going to be heavily involved in the school, because in public education, we just want to be confident and sure of what they're learning. And if they're learning things that maybe are contrary to what we believe as a family when it comes to some of the morality issues, probably not going to come up a ton in kindergarten, but you never know. We were prepared to be involved at that level to really dive in deep to the school so that we could be an active participant in that education. And we also had a desire, being so heavily involved in church, to be involved just in the community. Public school allows us to get into the community, to meet families who do not share our faith or our values, to meet others, and for our kids to encounter that as well. People who don't think like us or act like us or look like us or talk like us. And I think that was appealing to us, to say, hey, along the way in a public school environment, our kids are going to be able to encounter people who are different than them. And we're going to be able to talk through those things from our Christian worldview perspective. And that kind of went into some of our decision making too.
Yeah, and that gets back to the model of the family. You need to involve families. Growing up, our kids wanted to see the movies kids were seeing and read the books kids were reading. And we didn't deny them some of those. There was some we said, no, that's not appropriate. But the ones that they did that were more borderline, we made it a point to talk about those. What were they about? What were the values behind them? What a fantastic opportunity, though, to have your child bilingual in Mandarin. You think of the employment opportunities going forward, career opportunities and all that. Did you have any reluctance at all or any concern about the schools at some point indoctrinating your kids in certain types of moral issues, gender theory, or things like that? It sounds like you were actively checking that out to make sure it was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we did another school tour because the language program that we were involved in at the school we had chosen initially got canceled. As often happens, public school districts make budget cuts, and then suddenly the thing that you love about your school is no longer at your school. And so we actually shifted public schools when my son was going into third grade. And so went through the school tour thing again and walked through a few different other public schools. Again, Arizona is a wild place. You can say public school, but really it's like you get to choose among public school because we have this open enrollment thing. And we visited 3 different schools at that time, all public schools. We walked through one public school in one district, and we just, the posters on the walls, just the way the administrators kind of talked about things, it was a very much, I'm going to create my own self and my own identity. It was a very I-focused, create my own identity, be who I choose to be. Again, I'm not saying that that's all bad. I certainly want to encourage kids to discover who God has made them to be, but it was very much a me focus. And then another school, in contrast, again, another public school, had very much a community focus. We're doing this together. We are a school community. We want to help and lift each other up, benefit one another. And it just was a different feel, different focus, different mission and vision, maybe you could call it. And so we ended up going to that school instead. So yeah, these are always things. Now my kids are in, they just finished up 2nd grade and 5th grade. So they're not encountering the most intense level of kind of the cultural drift that we've seen as far as progressivism, if you want to put a label on it. But I know that stuff is going to come. And so I know that the impetus is on me to address those things with my kids before they encounter it in the school environment. So yeah, that's always on our radar, never not.
And that's great. Be an active parent, check those things out. We have the advantage of being in Arizona. We're finding options that are not inconsistent with our faith or they're not working against us. But there are parts of the country where that's not so. There have been cases out of California. There was a recent decision out of the 4th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, which is back kind of like Virginia way, where parents wanted to opt out of, in an elementary school level, wanted to opt out of, what was mandatory gender type instruction. And if you heard the titles of the books and the materials, you'd wince. And the school essentially said, no, you don't have a right to opt out. Other schools have gone further and even said, we're not even going to tell you when we're instructing on those things, which if you knew, you could keep your kid home that day or something. So, depending on the part of the country where you're at, these are very real issues. And there will be people listening to this podcast who don't have the benefit of being in perhaps a more conservative state or a state more sensitive to parental, wishes. So that's really a factor. You have to be an involved parent. Let's switch gears to popular misconceptions. We'll go around the horn again, starting with Kenna. There are misconceptions about Christian school, or let's say conceptions, that if you're in a Christian school, you're in some kind of a bubble, it's elite. Brendan mentioned one local Christian school, that's popular. Well, candidly, a lot of Christian school education is expensive. It may not be an option for some families, although there are some advantages in Arizona. We're very friendly. We've got ways that parents can offset costs and all that. But let's deal more with the cultural conception of it now. Oh, you're keeping your kids in a bubble. They're not being exposed to the real world. They're going to be thrown to the wolves later. Talk about that, Ken. How do you see those types of ideas floating out there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually asked my 2 girls, just since they're out the other side, what did you think about attending a Christian high school when you'd done public school? And what did you think were the pros and cons? And they both said they were so thankful to be there. They felt like the environment felt safer. The campus, you're just not running into the gay clubs, which is very prevalent now on a lot of campuses. A lot of the gender issues, things like that. They just felt a lot more comfortable on their campus. However, with that said, I will say there is a misconception that a Christian school will be a complete bubble, and it's not. I almost feel like the Christian campus is what 20 years ago public school felt like, is almost, obviously plus the Christian curriculum, which you're not going to have in a public school, but as far as just the vibe on campus. And I think there's a tad bit of a bubble, which is not why we chose it. However, you still have kids who drink and party, not nearly as much, but there is that. There are kids who cheat. There's kids who use pretty foul language. I mean, not every family, especially post COVID, they don't all go to church. Some people switch just simply to get a place that didn't have masks or opened up sooner. So I do remember being actually a little bit surprised that it's like, wow, it's kind of 50, or maybe it's a 75-25 of families that actually go to church and families who don't, or who put sports first and all that. So I don't want to downplay the environment, because it is, I would say it's better, but I don't feel like my kids were in such a bubble that they came out at the end of high school and were shocked by the world. No. And again, with social media, if your kids don't have that, then I think that's probably more of a bubble, which is not a bad thing by any means. And that's, again, another topic. But if you have kids who are even on a little bit of social media, even if they're at a Christian school, the bubble is more gone than it would have been. So I think that's a huge misconception. And yet, if you want to find Christian friends and you want to find solid believers and that matters to you, you can find them. And if you want to find kids who are a little bit more rebellious and sneaky and doing some of that, those kids are there. Again, not as much probably, but definitely. And then yes, the idea that it's unaffordable. And I know you kind of touch on that. I don't want to spend much time on that, but we do use the STO program. That's helped immensely. So I would definitely say, if you feel like you cannot afford it, don't assume that. Please go talk to whatever school you're looking at and find out your options, because we were shocked at how much we could get covered and how affordable it actually was. But the biggest misconception is usually that it's some kind of bubble. And again, it is, but it was enough of a bubble. I felt good, but not so much that I felt like my kids were clueless about the rest of the world and what was going on.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there. And it's true. You know, I've heard many parents say, look, your kids are going to find what they're looking for in any school. And that's true in a Christian school, and social media is kind of the great equalizer with that. And I'll say conversely, public schools have Bible clubs. When I was in private practice in New York, I represented many, many Christian Bible clubs. Back then, we were suing to allow them to meet. The law had just changed. There were public schools that were going off the rails in some respects. But the kids in the Christian clubs were they were bold. They were, kind of modern day Daniels and Esthers and all that. And they were attracting kids who thought there's something really different about you. I love the fact that you're talking about don't use drugs and, abstain from premarital sex and all that. So again, you're going to find what you're looking for in any environment. Leanne, let's switch to homeschooling. And, some of the ideas that we hear, or that, homeschool kids are going to be denied social interaction. There are maybe some conceptions that go back to many decades back. Homeschooling now looks nothing like what many people picture, from that title going back decades ago. Talk about some of those conceptions or misconceptions that kids are guarded, or they're not being socialized, or same kind of concern, they're in a bubble.
Yeah, sure. Well, that is the socialization issue is always one of the first questions you hear as a homeschooler. But I'm going to answer your question by kind of painting a picture of our week so you can see how much socialization is built into our students' lives. All day Monday, we are in a cottage school setting, which means my kids are in a classroom with different teachers. I'm there teaching the music program, and I'm working in the nursery with my now 3, he just turned 3, and my baby. Other than that, I'm teaching the music program only. So my kids see me for very limited bits of time on Monday as I'm teaching them their music and their choir selections. Other than that, they're learning Latin from a wonderful Latin teacher. They're learning science from someone who's not me. They have all these gifted teachers, and that's a long day. That goes from 9 to 3.
Is there some cost to that program?
There is. It's about $450 a student, but that covers you for the year. So it's a good value. And all the moms stay and serve. So we're schooling in community using the same classical curriculum together, moving at the same pace. And then Tuesday, we're in another co-op, which is a Charlotte Mason style enrichment co-op. And that's where they learn speech and debate. They study Plutarch, they study Shakespeare. There's a really gifted art teacher. So that's another day being done in community. So the first 2 days of our week are basically spent in a slightly non-traditional classroom setting, right? Lots and lots of social time. By the time Wednesday rolls around, the kids are ready to crash, and they love having a quiet day at home. But one of the lovely things about homeschool is that it does, all 3 of our families are trying to live out the Deuteronomy 6 mandate. I love that homeschool puts time on our side as we try to do that. So it does free up a lot of daytime hours for us. So Wednesday, my kids are all involved in acting classes. Thursday, my kids all take music lessons in the afternoon. Friday, there's a nature group that we're a part of that meets every 2 weeks. So we have all this social time built into our weekly calendar. Our lives are anything but isolated. They're very busy.
Well, one question now, the groups, the co-op groups that you're a part of, are they Christian specifically?
Yeah, they are. They are both Christian groups and just wonderful, really rich communities that we feel so blessed to be a part of. And in both communities, all the mothers stay and serve. So we've also really gotten to know a lot of the other families there, which has been a blessing to my husband and I, as well as our kids.
And Leanne, do you have a sense in the homeschooling community, because you can say homeschooling, but there are so many different ways to accomplish that specific goal. Do you see the co-op system as sort of the primary way that people are doing homeschool just in general these days? Or is that just one of many expressions of that education system?
That's such a good question. I'm so happy to say that it is one of many. And to our earlier point, I love how Kenna was really able to see how each of her children had different needs through different stages of their development. We have lots of families who they may have 5 children and 2 of them are being homeschooled and are in the co-op, but some of them are doing pods, or some of them are doing Christian school, or some of them are in public school. We have lots of families who are doing what works for individual students. And I think it's really wonderful that parents see that that can be such a benefit and a value to their family. There are also post-COVID many, many more options in our state than there have ever been in terms of hybrid schools. So if you're a family who wants a Christian school 3 days a week and you want to do 2 days a week at home, there are places now like that all over the valley that are available, and that the ESA program funds could apply to a setting like that, which has been a wonderful thing.
Would you say that the cottage programs are becoming more normative, more the rule rather than the exception in homeschooling models?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know anyone who is homeschooling just completely lone wolfing it by themselves. Anybody that I've met that's done it for the long haul has really experienced the benefit of being part of a group. I think it's essential.
Yeah, and for the right child, there are, more online resources now, and gosh, there's just so much more available. But let me ask this question. If someone is listening to this and they're thinking, boy, I'd love to do that, but I don't know that I have it in me. I wasn't a great student. It seems a little overwhelming to me, but boy, my kid would do great with it. What would you say to a person like that who feels like I'd like to do that, but I don't have the skill set?
I would say I know exactly how you feel. I felt the exact same way. And I think most mothers have I think it's a healthy thing to have fear, a healthy amount of fear. If you're going to take on your child's education, to know that you're assuming a grave responsibility. It really is important to know that this is a big undertaking, but also to have faith that if God calls you to it, He's going to equip you to do it. And there are so many resources available to you so that you won't feel alone. I would say take a long view of your child's education. If this is something that you see being for more than a short season of time, know that part of the beauty of homeschool is that you have the flexibility for every year to be a little different. And that's okay. We welcomed our 5th baby home this year. So our school looked very different. In years past, we've started really early and we've tried to be done by lunch, and we were rarely done by lunch. This year, we sometimes were going slowly all through the afternoon, puttering and taking lots of breaks. And that was okay. That was what needed to be done for this year.
What would you say to a parent who says, my son entering high school is an incredibly talented athlete. They're potentially a scholarship level Division I college player in football or basketball. And homeschooling, they're not getting the opportunity to show that off. What have you found in homeschooling? I know your kids are involved in a lot of athletic programs and leagues and all of that. What have you learned about questions like athletic opportunities for kids who show some kind of, athletic giftedness?
So I do know that there are Christian schools and I believe some charter schools around the valley that allow homeschool students to participate in their athletic programs. And that would be a really valuable thing for a family in that position to look into. We have, from the arts perspective, my husband has coached some really high profile, some Disney Channel stars and some working actors who the children are being homeschooled because their life is this very different. It's set up very differently. So you have people who choose to homeschool, actually, if you're really exceptional at something, to free up more of your daytime hours to devote to your craft or to your sport. So in some cases, it can be a really good thing for a gifted athlete. It gives them more time to train.
Well, boy, this has been a great conversation up to this point. There's so much more we want to go into. Let's do this. We're going to wrap up today's session, and we're going to look to do a part 2 because, again, there's so much more we want to go into. So thanks for all that you have contributed so far. Brendan, any thoughts as we close up part 1?
Yeah, if this episode has been helpful to you, we'd encourage you to share it with others. Be involved. You can also let us know how the conversation has gone for you. If you've got follow-up questions, always email us at viewpoint@highlandschurch.org. We'd love to be able to hear from you. Encourage you to share this with others, subscribe to the podcast, and for sure, come back as we go part 2 and really dive into getting to the heart of how do parents make this determination? What are the pros? What are the cons? And how can Christian parents faithfully navigate the waters of how to educate their kids? And so we will see you soon for part 2.